You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Next Tuesday, May the 4th, is Election Day. In the city of Cincinnati, Issue 4 proposes a major transformation of the city charter of 1924. After years of complaints about council ineffectiveness and the lack of leadership, proponents of Issue 4 want to strengthen the office of the mayor. Various groups concerned with the perceived ineffectiveness of Cincinnati city government have worked on and floated proposals over the last 5 years. This specific proposal grew out of the efforts of an ad hoc organization called Build Cincinnati over the last year. These efforts have been the frequent topic of newsmakers, including 3 programs in the last 6 or 7 months. Given that, this morning we can dispense with a lot of the background data and try to focus on the specific questions that are framed by the language of Issue 4. We will spend the entire program this morning on Issue 4. Views on Issue 4 do not divide along a single line. Organizations that normally are political opponents, like the Greater Cincinnati Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO Labor Councils, happen to be allies in this situation, while organizations that normally are united, like the Baptist Ministers Conference and the NAACP, find themselves on opposite sides. To do this topic justice, I have tried to capture a variety of voices and perspectives on tape, while in the studio I'm joined by 2 guests. Phil Heimlich is a Republican member of council and a supporter of Issue 4 reforms. Tyrone Yates is a Democratic member of City Council and has assumed the leadership of opposition on Issue 4. For both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers, both frequent guests here.
Thank you.
And we're going to, as I said, I want to plunge right in. And the first thing I want to take a look at is this issue of exactly what it does to the election of the mayor. And just to clarify that, Issue 4 calls for replacing the current system in which the top vote getter in the field race becomes mayor with a direct election of the mayor. Candidates who wish to run for mayor would run in a nonpartisan primary held in September. The top 2 vote getters in the primary would then run against each other in November. The winner would become mayor. The loser would not become a member of council, thus eliminating a source of constant friction from council. The mayor would serve a 4-year term with a limit of 2 consecutive terms. Now, you know, the real controversy here is whether this will allow the wealthy business interests to focus their dollars to, in effect, buy the mayor's office for a Republican, if we want to be perfectly blunt about this. Let's hear what a couple people have to say.
With that person having so much power, I believe that the mayor's position will be a position that's painted green, and that those persons who have money and have enough clout, they'll be the one to select the mayor, whether they're African American or not. That person will have to answer and abide by those who put him in office.
I think in a primary, grassroots, neighborhood, community-based politics is going to prevail. I would be very surprised that once there is a primary, that one of the candidates is not going to be someone that has a value of the communities of labor, of bringing this forward.
Okay, Phil, is this just a cover to find a way in an increasingly Democratic city to allow a Republican to be elected mayor?
Dan, the fact of the matter is the most important thing about Issue 4 is it promotes democracy because it gives our citizens the chance to vote directly for our mayor. We're one of the only cities in the country that doesn't let our citizens directly vote for their own mayor. So it promotes democracy. That's the most important thing, and that's why we have such a broad range of groups and leaders supporting it. Mayor Qualls, Bobby Stern, Governor Gilligan, the NAACP, head of the Democratic Party.
But in fact, doesn't this, by focusing on one office, which will become a premier office, allow the moneyed interest, as Reverend Jones says, to turn this green and focus their attention there and really capture control?
Well, you could say that about the race for senator, governor, president. Those are democratically elected offices. Do you want to abolish those offices? Because there's a lot of spending that goes on for those races. There's already a lot of contributions that are given for council races. Is that a reason, though, to not put forward a system that's much more democratic?
Tyrone, what about Dan Radford's point that because of this primary, in the end, there will always be what he refers to as a progressive candidate emerge in the primary, and therefore ordinary people will be able to overcome the moneyed green interest that Dr. Jones talks about.
Well, certainly in contrast to Mr. Radford's comments, the largest labor unions in Cincinnati are in opposition to issue 4, the Building Trades Council, particularly because of the suggestions that you raised and Reverend Jones raised on the tape. As a matter of fact, the only groups that are thoroughly united in support of this matter are big business and the Republican Party. Almost all the other groups in the city are divided. But if voters really want to look for cues, look for groups that don't have really a vested interest, like the League of Women Voters and the Women's City Club, which are solidly opposed to this proposition. This proposition is the very antithesis of democracy because it puts too much power in the hands of an elected mayor.
And we're going to get to the question of powers of the mayor in a moment, though. But on this election question, the city is increasingly going to become African American and probably working class in terms of economic structure. Isn't, in the long run, aren't the votes there to always overcome that money interest?
Well, no, really. I think that the best proposition is look at this in Democratic terms with a small d and Republican terms with a small r. I'm not interested, nor are the Citizens Against Issue 4, in what party or what group ends up to be as mayor. We want a democratic process in which any citizen, no matter what their race, political stripe, socioeconomic background, or occupation, has a chance to participate freely in an informed way in the democracy, and Issue 4 does not promote that.
Okay. Now the real question here, I mean, the race is one thing, but the real question is about the powers that the mayor is going to end up with under Issue 4. And let's take a look at that. Under Issue 4, the mayor, who will no longer be a member of council, but will have the power to propose and introduce legislation. The mayor can also veto legislation. Although 9 members of council will be able to override that veto with 6 votes, the mayor will have the power to appoint the chairpersons of council committees, a very controversial aspect of this. The mayor will also be responsible for commencing any effort to remove and hire the city manager, but will need the approval of council for either decision. It is these powers that raise the most debate over Issue 4. And again, let's hear some other voices.
Anytime you increase one branch of government's power, in this case the mayor's power, it has to be taken from someone. Unfortunately, in this proposal, it's taken away from council for the most part, but at the same time, I think the powers of the city manager are substantially reduced, because in that the mayor will be able to initiate the hiring and firing of the city manager is going to always have to stay on the good side of the mayor.
It's not a strong mayor. That is what upset me on this entire campaign. It is not a strong mayor. We have a city manager form of government now. We will have a city manager form of government next in 2001, whether or not it's elected or not. Obviously, the mayor, if this passes, will have more influence, would have more credibility, would be looked to by the community in the nation as a leader here, and that's exactly what we want.
Tyrone, on the powers here, and I think this is the heart of the debate about not the election process, although we can debate that as we did, but what's wrong with a veto power, with the ability to initiate legislation, to take some leadership in what lots of people perceive as a body that doesn't seem to have leadership? What's wrong with that?
Well, power and leadership are different things, and what we need is not more power, but more leadership in the city. But specifically, in Charter Issue 4, the mayor will not only have the power to appoint the committee chairs, but also the power to remove them without consent, which is very troubling. As well, the mayor will be able to appoint the vice mayor and to remove them without consent. And the idea that a mayor who is not a member of the council under Issue 4 will preside over the council, assign all legislation to committees, and be able to introduce legislation at the same time is troubling, so troubling that this week the Ohio City Managers Association have come out in opposition to what Mr. Radford said, in opposition to this, believing that a mayor will undermine the city manager and the council's legislative powers as well.
On these specific issues, especially the appointment powers to council committees and to the vice mayor, Phil, what about that? Those are extraordinary powers.
Well, not really. The fact of the matter is, Dan, you have to look at the present system. Right now, we do not have a checks and balances system. We have the council that has all the power. The mayor has no power. What Issue 4 does is restore that balance of power. Also, by giving the mayor the ability to appoint committee chairs and veto legislation, it kind of requires the council to work with the mayor so we have more cooperation and less fighting between the two. And let me say, the opponents of Issue 4 have misstated the suggestion that somehow this creates too much power in the mayor. Look at any other city that has a true strong mayor. Chicago, New York, any of these cities. In those cities, the mayor appoints the police chief, the fire chief, and hires every city employee. Under Issue 4, all that power remains with the city manager.
You know, I've got to say, Tyrone, as you know, I know you teach political science. I have an interest in political science. Taking this, just analyzing this isn't really a strong mayor system. This is a strengthened mayor system, but the city manager still is right there and very powerful in terms of these appointment powers and control of the bureaucracy. This is not what we would call an executive mayor, right? Even though you call it a strong mayor or too strong or whatever.
Well, by the book, it may appear to be okay, but in practical terms, as the Ohio City Managers Association has said this week, an organization of Ohio's 220 city managers and city administrators, this process so bifurcates the power between a mayor and a city council with control over the city manager as to be unworkable, and that, frankly, there is no other council manager form of government in the United States that has this collection of powers. So while my worthy opponent talks about one or two, it's the whole array of powers which makes this this charter issue so bad for democratic principles.
Phil, I mean, why did we end up with this particular mix? Is it, did it have to be this way?
Well, quite honestly, it was a consensus process that put together what we have. It involved Democrats, Republicans, and charterites. And I think the best rebuttal I can make to Tyrone's point is the Charter Party has been the most aggressive defender of the city manager form of government. They support this. Bobby Stern has stood up with us and supports it. So I think we can trust the charterites to know what's best in terms of protecting the city manager form of government.
That is an amazing factor here, that the charterites have come out in support of this proposal, and that Bobby Stern has been one of the leading voices on the pro side. How do you answer that? I mean, they are the protectors of the city manager.
Well, it is surprising, it is interesting, it's intriguing, and it's perplexing at the same time. Of course, Mr. Heimlich didn't mention that charter is split down the middle on this question. They decided by a very close vote. And former charter mayor Theodore M. Berry, former charter vice mayor Marion Spencer, and many other charter board members are in steep opposition to this. And the charter committee did not hear from the Ohio City Managers Association until this week.
But you can cite other former charter mayors like Arn Boards who does support it, right? I mean, what you're saying is charter is split, Democrats are split, lots of organizations are split on this. This is a controversial issue that doesn't divide along normal lines.
Well, what really happened is, in fact, with the Democratic Party, our party chairman, many of us feel, acted without authority because he began to get involved in the issue and is on the side of Issue 4, yet the policy-making body of the Democratic Party for city issues voted 77 to 62 to oppose it. So we're not quite sure what the chairman of the party was doing.
Well, we're going to get at some of those political dynamics after the break, but we are going to take a break. Stay right there. Stay tuned. We're going to come right back.
Now, we're at a crossroads, and we can bumble along as we're doing, and we'll be okay. Or we can seize the moment and really make a difference.
the way Columbus, who they use as an example, and the way Indianapolis, who they use as an example moving ahead, is because they've either annexed or they've formed Unigov. We haven't done that here. And simply coming up with a new proposal in the way we operate our government is not going to change those things.
Welcome back. Once you sift through all the details of Issue 4, the fundamental question remains: what will be the overall impact? As you might expect, that's in dispute as well. One issue is how will these changes impact access to the city's decision makers? A couple of perspectives.
I think it's going to deny average citizens accessibility to their government. At least I believe, under the current system, as a person living in a neighborhood and a neighborhood activist, I have the ability to leverage 9 members of council. Under this proposal, I'm afraid, because, again, of those powers that would be granted the mayor, the only person I could leverage would be the mayor, because the mayor is going to decide where any proposed legislation out of whatever might be suggested by a neighborhood group or whoever, where it's going to go and who the chairs of those committees are. And if the mayor doesn't like my proposal, it's not going to see the light of day.
A company comes to town, who do they deal with? Where's the assurance that somebody is charged with the responsibility of putting it together on the legislative side, on the council side, on the elected side, as opposed to the administrative side?
Question of access. Phil, are we going to concentrate so that neighborhood people, the only person that's going to be worth trying to lobby and go to is the mayor?
Well, Dan, I think what Issue 4 does, it returns power to the voters because it gives them the ability, which almost every other city in the country has, for the voters to vote for their mayor.
No. But what about after the mayor is elected, getting access and trying to influence policy of government?
Well, I think that brings up the issue of accountability. Right now, there's no accountability. Under this system, you're going to have 2 people running, and they're going to have to say what they stand for, what their vision is, and then when that person's elected, that person is going to be accountable for implementing what they said they'd do.
Okay. Tyrone, on the one hand, that's exactly one of the points. People will have to stand up and say, this is what I stand for, and 4 years later, say, this is what I did in relationship to what I said I stood for, and have to be challenged on that. Responsibility. On the other side is this question of, well, does that take away the authority and the ability of these 9 people, who right now, though, the experience is all 9 of them can be accessed, but they're all pointing in different directions about who's responsible for things. What about that?
Well, it's not an unfair argument to state that perhaps the centralizing the power in some way may improve what we consider to be issues of accountability. But that has to be weighed and balanced carefully against traditional democratic norms. And in our society, centralizing so much power in one person is not good. So we trade a little bit in all of our systems. In the federal government, we don't concentrate all of our power in the president. We don't concentrate all of our power in the governor. And we don't concentrate all of our power in the mayor. So there's going to be a little trade-off in that. But I tell you what's circulating, and I'm not the author of this, but just like the business community has stated, they want access and accountability. Now people are calling this proposal, buy 1 and get 9 free.
Is that what it is? That goes back to the first question.
Well, it goes back to the question of democracy. And the fact is, Dan, this gives the people in this city the chance to vote for who they want for mayor. Right now we have an accidental mayor. Whoever ends up, you spin the wheel, whoever ends up with the most council votes happens to be mayor. There's no race for mayor. Nobody gets to say what they stand for. Nobody gets to vote for who they want for mayor. It's an outdated system. That's why we're one of the few cities in the country left with this system.
Well, I'll
go ahead.
If I can reply, I don't want to interrupt, but
no.
We just changed the charter less than 10 years ago and talk about an outdated system. We haven't changed the county charter since 1888. So it isn't the age. We ought to be focusing on the efficiency of the system.
But Tyrone, and boy, we could talk about the county charter. That's something we bring up here and here all the time. I'd love to change that monster. But anyway, the point is, the perceived situation at City Hall is that it's a mess, especially since 1987 and the top vote getter situation. And I think that's what people are saying. Out of frustration, if nothing else, we got to do something here to change this.
Well, not really. There isn't a lot of broad-based support for this proposition in truth, and Mr. Heimlich knows that the more voters understand the details and the concentrations of powers, the more turned off about this. The voters do actually like.
But you know, concentration of powers. I mean, what about the places that are seen as the gazelle cities, you know, the Phoenixes and the Indianapolises and the Columbuses, much less Chicago's. I mean, there's a lot of power concentrated at a particular point where people know what the policy is, what the agenda is, and they move forward, right?
Well, actually no. In none of the cities that you mentioned does the mayor appoint the president of the council or the vice mayor of the city, nor does the mayor organize the committee councils and remove the committee chairs. In none of those cities that you mentioned.
This is really the hang-up, that the mayor gets to appoint council chair people. That's really the hang-up here, right?
No,
council trying to protect, this sounds like the Congress trying to protect its traditions or something to me. If we'd have said the mayor was separate, it is an executive branch of government and will concentrate power there, and council is the legislative branch, you would have been happy? You would have been just as mad.
Well, no, actually there are all kinds of permutations, but the best system for a city of our size is the small council of 9 that we have, where you would select the mayor from among the members of council with a professional city manager. The system that
we had for 70 years.
Yes.
Well, see, what Tyrone is saying is he doesn't want the voters to choose their mayor. He wants to choose the mayor. And that's why I say this all comes down to democracy. And another thing, Dan, we often hear citizens say council can't seem to, well, the argument is we don't get things done in the city. But this system is going to promote cooperation between the mayor and the council so we can get things done and end the gridlock that we often face down at City Hall.
Or promote gridlock.
Yes, but the problem is that, Mr. Heimlich, that was a speech. But factually, the mayor will have more power over the legislature and is the only person who can start the removal process for the hiring and the firing of a city manager, which this week the Ohio City Managers Association has said
a few years
they
ago
oppose.
When Jerry Newfarmer, that was a ugly mess when that got happened too. So just because it's in council's hand doesn't mean it's smooth or intelligent process. I want to get to one more issue here, and that's the question of African American influence in this city, which is population-wise growing. Reverend Jones has a point to make.
Currently, on our city council, we have 4 persons of African American descent, and we feel it quite strange that all of a sudden the system does not work. This is the highest number of African Americans serving on council in the history of this city, and this is the one time that the community has a good representation to voice our concerns. And we find it strange that all of a sudden the democratic system that has worked for over 50 years no longer works.
Tyrone, is there a racial component to this?
I speak to you, Dan, not as an American of African descent or a Republican or a Democrat or a Charterite. This is bad for all of our citizens because it concentrates too much power in the hands of one person to the extent...
Yeah, we've heard that, but is there a racial component to this?
What I think is an unintended consequence of this proposal may be to dilute the impact of African American voters.
We have about 30 seconds left, Phil. There has been a history in this county, not necessarily in the city, of as soon as African Americans begin to emerge, we change the voting system to dilute their influence. Is that what's going on here?
Well, I haven't always agreed with Dr. Hinton and the NAACP on every issue, but we're arm in arm on this. And I trust him. The NAACP has played a leading role in formulating this, and they're supporting it. I think we can trust their judgment.
Well, I think it's only fair to point out here that the NAACP, the black community is split too. The NAACP is for it, but a lot of other organizations are opposed to it.
And I would also point out, look at Houston, where Lee Brown was elected. Look at Willie Brown in San Francisco, which have a lower percentage of African Americans than Cincinnati. There's no reason to suggest there's any racial component here.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and hopefully we covered some important issues. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Turnout for this spring primary in Hamilton County is predicted to be about 20% of the registered voters. It's not because nothing important is on the ballot. If you live in Cincinnati, vote on issue 4. It's critical to set the context for the next years to come, no matter how you vote. School levies are on the ballot in 4 communities, and everyone in Hamilton County who thinks they might need a police officer, a firefighter, or a paramedic in the future should weigh in on how to fund a proposed emergency communications levy, issue 3. In other words, Tuesday is important. Have a good week. By the way, all the polling places in Blue Ash and Montgomery are intact. Voters in the tornado area should return to their established polling places. See you next week.